Hey guys, welcome back to the second episode of the DC Squad Pod. I'm your host, Chris, and I created and run the Instagram account known as Dallas Cowboys Squad. Today, we're bringing in a special co-host who also contributes to the Cowboys fan community, my friend Cameron. Cam, why don't you tell the viewers what you do surrounding the Cowboys?
What's up, guys? I'm Cameron Burnett. I'm currently a writer for the Cowboys Wire through USA Today, edited by Katie Drummond, and I've been a Cowboys fan my whole life, and I'm excited to give you all the information regarding them.
All right, awesome. So we just got off of a busy week in free agency surrounding the NFL. Cowboys made a couple moves. They brought in Keanu Neal. That's the most recent move that we made. Signed a 1-year, $5 million deal. Cowboys are finally addressing the safety position after a long time of fans asking for it. We're also hosting free safeties Zamonte Casey and Malik Hooker for visits this upcoming week. How do you feel about the signing, Cameron?
I'll tell you what, being a Cowboys fan for a long time, you hear about a lot of former guys like Darren Woodson. You always want that big-time safety to be in Dallas, and I think he brings a little bit of a different dynamic. Keanu Neal was a safety for a large portion of his NFL career, but now he's gone into a little bit more of that Derwin James kind of hybrid role where he almost plays linebacker. And of course, he had 100 tackles last year, and I think he brings a different aspect, and especially for a guy like Jalen Smith, who's become a little bit more of a pass rusher and a little bit more in the box, he can come out on third down, and Keanu Neal can come in and bring a little bit more of a dynamic to that defense defending the pass.
Exactly. I love this signing personally. He brings the sideline to sideline speed that like a safety often brings, but he's also a big hitter and he's great in coverage for a linebacker position, not necessarily in the back end of the safety. You look for better coverage in that department than what he brings, but that's why I think he would be a great linebacker fit. I think he would be great even man up on a tight end potentially. I think he has the size and that coverage ability to really take out tight ends. So I think it's a very good move, and I think he'll fit in perfectly, really, because Dan Quinn is back with the Cowboys now, and he's coaching up the defensive side of the ball. So I think he'll fit in well with him.
And I also think it'll be really valuable for a guy like Donovan Wilson, because on face value, when you see another safety getting signed, you think that has an influence on his playing time. But Donovan Wilson playing the strong safety, I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, especially after the year he had, especially late, forcing all those turnovers. And I think it's really helpful to give him the security at his position, but also bring in help to make the defense better.
Exactly. I think that Donovan Wilson really was one of the bright spots in the really frustrating season we had last year with all the injuries. And, it was definitely disappointing coming out with that record. But he, along with, I think, Dalton Schultz, were two players that came in kind of on the bottom of their depth chart in the position that they were playing, and they both really impressed. Donovan Wilson was just killer. He was forcing all these type of takeaways. He was always where the ball was, and that's something that you really look for, those ball instincts at the safety position. So I really hope to see him build off that in this upcoming season.
I guess so now we'll move on to talk about guys like KZ and Hooker. Of course, now KZ has, I believe, an interview set up on, Wednesday now. And Malik Hooker, they're still planning to go this week, but it's not really set in stone. Of course, you have to deal with all the medical things through COVID, but I think that'll be soon. And hopefully there's more information on contract talks there and what they'll be doing.
Yeah, I definitely think that those interviews are more so for them to be able to check their health and to get the meetings with the doctors, both coming off of season-ending Achilles injuries. Those are very tough to come back from, especially at the safety position where there's a lot of movement going on. So I think that that's probably the biggest aspect of these interviews, and that's why the Cowboys are taking their time with it. Let's talk about a move that the Eagles made, actually. The Eagles brought in Anthony Harris on a 1-year, $5 million deal, actually the exact same deal that we brought in Keanu Neal for. How do you feel about the Cowboys choosing to go Neal instead of Harris potentially?
Well, I think it was thinking about the draft as well, because when you look at a guy like Anthony Harris, of course, he's a playmaker on what was an interesting Minnesota defense, but I'm not sure if it was the fit for the Cowboys, because I think you would have taken away from what Donovan Wilson's been doing. And I think they're definitely going to look for a guy like KZ who really has a connection to the coach, same as Neal. And I think that makes it a lot easier to bring him into the defense that Dan Quinn's going to be bringing to all the guys that were already in Dallas. And having to put that on more players just makes it a lot harder. And I think KZ's a better fit for this defense if they're able to sign him like it seems like they might.
Yeah, I agree. I would love to bring KZ in, especially since I don't really love the free safety draft class this year, and especially for where we're picking to. I don't see any of those guys as a number 10 pick, so I definitely think we have to bring in a free safety off of free agency. It'll be interesting to see what happens with free safety Xavier Woods, where he'll sign. I mean, who knows? Maybe the Cowboys bring him back on a cheap deal and try and let him compete for the spot. Be interesting to see. So let's talk also about the other signings and some of the departures that occurred over free agency. So we brought in Keanu Neal, of course, and then we brought in offensive tackle Ty Nsekhe, defensive end Terrell Basham, defensive tackle Brent Urban, defensive tackle Carlos Watkins, and long snapper Jake McQuaid. Do any of those guys like really jump off the table for you?
Well, what I'll say, we were just talking a bunch about Keanu Neal playing in that linebacker area. And if you're going to have an undersized guy playing in that linebacker area, what do you need to match with him? Some big defensive tackles, some big one techs. So that's what you get with Watkins and Urban. You get guys who are going to get in there, get dirty, and get in the way of all those running plays. So it makes it easier for Neal to push those gaps.
Especially Urban, too. I mean, that's a 6'7", 305-pound dude in the middle.
That's a big guy.
It's a big guy. And also what I love is a little pro football focus stat. His run defense grade was at 83.7 last season, which was the third best for all interior defensive linemen in 2020. That's something that the Cowboys really lacked. We needed some interior run defense. And so to get that on another cheap deal, I mean, he signed a 1-year, $1.75 million deal. I mean, very, very low risk. You know, it could end up being good for the Cowboys, and if it's not, then it's not like they spent a lot. So
and I think that's a trend you're seeing with what the Cowboys are doing in free agency. Of course, after you sign Dak to a monster deal, you don't want to spend a bunch of money out there, and then you're going to have to sign guys you go for in the draft. So they're just trying to be smart with it and just see what they can get for cheap. Of course, they might make a big splash signing in the next week or so, but I think we're not going to see too much more. They're just going to look for role guys they can build off of in a new defense.
Yeah, I would guess, just my personal prediction, that Keanu Neal is probably the biggest name we're going to sign in terms of like a big name player. I mean, he's a former Pro Bowler. He definitely made an impact throughout his career. I mean, there are some players who are still available who could definitely be interesting. I mean, in terms of cornerbacks, there's still Richard Sherman, huge name that you could reunite with Dan Quinn potentially. You got Casey Hayward, Brian Poole, Quentin Dunbar, Nickel, Robert Coleman, and Malcolm Butler. Those are all names that could impact the cornerback room, which the Cowboys have been making some changes and adjustments to that. How would you feel about potentially bringing in a Richard Sherman, a guy who has experience with Dan Quinn, not in the peak of his prime athleticism, but definitely still has the brain that comes with being a Hall of Fame cornerback?
Well, of course, everybody knows who Richard Sherman is. We know that when he was there with the Legion of Boom, with Dan Quinn, we know what his reputation is. And that brings a lot to a locker room, not just, of course, his ability on the field, even though he's a little bit older, but guys like Trayvon Diggs, they can learn so much off of him. And then let's say we draft Surtain, Farley, Horn, etc. That brings a lot to them. Jordan Lewis, he'll learn a lot from him. It's just all around, if you can get him on a deal that's cap friendly, I think that brings a lot to the team. And then another name I'd like to talk about is Adoree Jackson.
I would love to bring in Adoree Jackson.
The Cowboys would be very successful with this free agency if they were able to get him. But as we saw, I believe it was yesterday, I think Adoree Jackson was with Logan Ryan. Of course, they played together in Tennessee, and then maybe trying to bring him into New York, which, of course, bothers me a little bit, but we'll have to see how that unfolds.
Actually, yeah, Cameron, I'm going to interrupt you, actually. While the stream was going on, Adoree Jackson actually just signed a 3-year, $39 million deal with the New York Giants.
Well, there you go. There's your explanation.
I mean, that's probably a lot more than the Cowboys were willing to spend on Adoree Jackson as well. I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot of money. And I don't think the Cowboys would have ever made that move, especially with the number
No
10 pick in
chance.
the draft. There's no chance they would have spent that money. However, I do think Adoree Jackson is a playmaker, and I think it adds on to some of the good signings that the Giants have made so far. And we'll get into the rest of the division later in the stream. But yeah, I mean, that's good for the Giants. So let's talk about this current cornerback room we have going on right now. So we're coming off of a year that our cornerbacks were a little shaky. It took Trevon Diggs a little bit to get going, but I really think he turned up at the back end of the season. So coming in, we had both Jordan Lewis and Chidobe Awuzie as free agents, and we brought back one of them. We brought back Jordan Lewis on a 3-year, $16.5 million deal, and we lost Chidobe Awuzie to the Cincinnati Bengals. How do you feel like that impacts the cornerback room heading into next season?
Well, when we got into free agency, I think when you look at Lewis and you look at Awuzie, you look at the seasons they had last year, and if you had to pick one who you're going to keep, it was going to be Lewis. Awuzie was low on almost every single percentile on PFF, and he didn't really fit the situation, especially if they go Surtain in the draft. They need a slot guy like Jordan Lewis, and I think that's probably the best decision for them. 3 years, $16 million, that's a good bit of money, but for the dynamic he's shown in the slot, I think it's a good deal for a young guy.
Yeah, I think that kind of can be a misleading contract because I think that may seem like a decent amount right now with the way the cap space shrunk. But when that cap space opens back up with the new TV deals, I don't think that that's going to be seen as a very big contract. I think that'll be pretty team friendly if he can continue playing well in the slot. I thought Jordan Lewis has had some coverage mishaps and struggles throughout his career. But one thing I will always say, just like Donovan Wilson, is he always found the football. He always found a way to force the takeaway and give the defense something to be happy about and give the offense some momentum, which, takeaways are not the most common thing we see in the Dallas defense very often.
Yeah, and one thing, like, of course, you talk about big plays and like those moments that you remember. I can't specifically think of a Chidobe Awuzie play that really pops out at me, but one that really does. I remember back in 2018 when Jordan Lewis made that big play, that big pick on the last possession against the Saints. I think that's something that you can really look back on and be like, that's when he showed that he has a knack for the ball. And I think Dan Quinn can do a lot with him in this defense.
Yeah. Okay, so we got an interesting question actually coming from Dan Hackett. He asks, why was Jerry so willing to pay Dak after a season-ending injury and not after a healthy season? I think – okay, so all right, so I'm going to go at this first. I think that it wasn't Jerry's necessarily intent not to sign him after that healthy season. I think he's always wanted to and he was always interested, but the money and and just the like small details weren't really agreed upon. I don't know. I think that I think us not making the playoffs and kind of struggling on offense after we lost Dak to injury also really showed that he's a valuable player and we definitely needed to seal him up. What about you, Cameron?
Okay, well, I'm going to go two different ways. First, I'm just going to talk about Dak as a player. Of course, wasn't a great start to the year. Why did they win the game against the Falcons? Dak Prescott. Why were they in the game against the Browns? Dak Prescott. And, of course, later in the year, the defense got a little bit better. Would they have won some of those games if they had Dak Prescott? I'm not going to say yes, but there was probably a pretty good chance. And Dak's proven that since he's been a Cowboy, it goes beyond just being on the field. I think he's a great guy. He's brought a lot of leadership to that locker room. And, of course, he was on pace for some ridiculous stats, over around 6,000 yards had he not gotten injured. Of course, that's a crazy number. You don't know if he would have held on to that, but that's that kind of trajectory that he was on. And then another thing I'm going to say, of course, that's so willing to pay him. That contract on face value looks crazy, but of course now with the big talk with those voidable contracts, being able to spread that cap a little bit more, especially with a big signing bonus like that, I think it makes it a little bit more cap friendly, especially talking about the possibility of franchise tagging him. That would have costed the Cowboys a lot more money, and I think this deal is good for everyone, including his teammates.
Very true, actually. I was honestly shocked at how well that contract was structured for the Cowboys. whenever you originally look at that deal and you see the 4-year, $160 million contract, your first thought is, wow, $40 million a year. But that's not really how it works in the NFL with cap hit, and they definitely found a way to spread it out. Dak's cap hit for this season is like 22.5 million. Yeah. 22 million. That's very favorable, and it's a lot more favorable than the 37 he would have counted against the cap if he had signed that franchise tag. So I definitely think that had a huge play in Jerry wanting to get that deal done, because we wouldn't be able to bring in guys like Keanu Neal and Brent Urban and Carlos Watkins. There's some fans who are complaining about how quiet the Cowboys have been this free agency. I won't say quiet. I think they've been patient and they've been very selective and picky. Yes, they've been deliberate. I just imagine if Dak was on the franchise tag right now, they would be very, very restricted in what they could do. So yeah, and he's certainly going to have a lot of pressure coming into this upcoming season after signing that big contract. Fans in Dallas are really, they're becoming impatient on the Super Bowl drought. It's becoming like a Super Bowl or bust type of mentality. Although our team sometimes may not be built for those kind of expectations, the fans are just so ready for it.
And then you see that quote right there, pressure is privilege. It's a privilege to have it. In that interview, in that big, long press conference, Dak was speaking of that one thing, that Super Bowl win, and he wouldn't have signed the deal or accepted that deal if he didn't have that opportunity.
All right, another question, going back to the secondary. Dan Hackett asks again, how do you guys see Keanu Neal fitting in a Dan Quinn defense? He obviously had success in Atlanta. Can that translate to his time in Dallas? I don't see why it wouldn't translate to his time in Dallas. Especially, I think the one question will be, how will he transition into the linebacker role compared to the safety role he played more with Atlanta? But I can definitely see him doing very well in this defense. He just has all the measurables and just the pure talent at what you would look for at a weak side linebacker. He has the speed, he has the coverage abilities at the linebacker position. And I think really his ability to play off the edge, potentially even as a pass rusher in some downs, he can be very impactful pretty much on every level of the defense. And I see him fitting in very nicely with Dan Quinn in Dallas.
Yeah, I agree with that. And especially on a 1-year deal that's barely going to hurt the Cowboys, it's ultimately a win-win because they bring in a guy like that and they don't have to hurt themselves in their checkbook. So I think he can be really good. Of course, like we talked about earlier, playing that little bit of a linebacker role, he can come in on those third downs, replace a guy like Jalen Smith. I think it makes it a lot easier for everybody else out there.
Yeah, I mean, like even looking at this highlight tape, it showed him rushing off the edge and sacking Matt Stafford. I mean, it just shows his ability. And then right here, you see that interception in coverage. He gets, yes, it's over Patrick Mahomes, but we'll take the interception regardless. I think he definitely can provide a lot for the team, especially with that hitting ability. I mean, he just has a knack to knock the football out. And I'm very excited to see what he can do at every level of this defense this upcoming season.
And then, of course, now that we're talking about the secondary, do we want to go into what could be at play in the draft?
Yeah. Let's talk for a little bit about what we are going to do with the cornerback position and potentially what we could do in the draft with that. So the Cowboys are picking 10, and that's really the perfect spot for the first or second cornerback in this class to be drafted at. And I think those 3 players, I originally thought it was a 2-player conversation with Farley and Surtain, but it seems like J.C. Horn is really jumping off the table and just jumping on the screen at his pro day, and he's just rising up mock drafts. So let's talk about those 3 corners. Who would you want the most between those 3?
Of course, before today, I would have said Caleb Farley. That would have been my first pick, but of course, there was questions. Of course, he takes the year off. He's rehabbing off a back injury, and now he's having another surgery, and there's uncertainty of if he'll be ready to play at any time next year. And that's something that you can't take at 10. Let's say it's a second-round pick, of course, like what we did with Jalen Smith back in 2016. That's those kind of chances you take. You can't do that at 10 when you're looking to contend next year. I think Surtain's the best option. Of course, people are going to bring up the college football playoff where he got beat up a little bit, even late in the SEC season. He was leaving guys open. But I think he's probably the best option right now. Although don't sleep on J.C. Horn. When a guy's shooting up the mock drafts like this, it doesn't happen for no reason. We remember when it's the other side of the ball, but when a guy like DK Metcalf just shot up the boards and then became a great NFL player, those things don't just happen for no reason. And I think it's good to have multiple options, especially if a team before the Cowboys were to take one of the pair of Surtain or Horn, because I don't think Farley's going to go before them after today's news.
Yeah, I think it's also an interesting fact I saw is that the same injury or the same surgery that Farley will be having, actually, the Cowboys brass and training staff has experience with. That same surgery happened with Tony Romo back with all his back issues. So it'll be interesting how they weigh that recovery process into their draft selection thought. My guy, my very first pick in this whole draft for the Cowboys, really anywhere, has been Surtain from the beginning. I think he's such a polished corner with his technique and just – he has such a knack for coverage and just his ability. It's so it's hard to explain, but if you watch it, you just see him, and he definitely knows what he's doing at the cornerback position. And I think that comes with having a former Pro Bowl dad at the cornerback position too. He also has great size. He has great height for the cornerback position. And I think playing in the SEC with all those good receivers they've had there definitely is a good trait to have. He's also been on. Yeah, go.
What we were saying regarding these corners, we were just talking about Richard Sherman. I think in this defense that Dan Quinn runs, Trayvon Diggs fits perfectly, where it's those big physical corners. All three of these guys fit that billing. Just so you're talking about their technique, they're really strong in it. I think Horn and Surtain, especially since we've seen them in the last year, can get up and press receivers and cause them a lot of issues, and I think that's really good. I saw Dan Hackett asked something about Asante Samuel at 10. I think it's a little bit of a reach, but I think he's a really good player, but he's going to go in the first round if I had to guess right now, but I just don't think he fits the defense that Dan Quinn wants to run with these big physical corners. Asante Samuel Jr. is a little bit of an undersized corner. He's more known for his speed, and I don't think that's what Dan Quinn wants at the outside of his defense.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at the outside corners, we're definitely looking for some more size, especially since we already have two slot corners signed to a contract, and Anthony Brown and Jordan Lewis, who are kind of on the undersized spectrum of cornerbacks. So I think I'm definitely thinking that Dan Quinn is looking for a taller cornerback at that outside position. Sal asked, how will we do this year? Will our defense improve? I think that our defense is going to be a lot better, and I'm not necessarily sure it's going to be as much the players we add, even though I think it will be a very draft focused based off the defense. I think it's going to be more that we brought in Dan Quinn instead of Mike Nolan. I mean, last year under Mike Nolan was just a disaster everywhere. I mean, players looked confused in coverage. Players showed lack of effort and heart at some times. It just looked like poor leadership. And bringing in Dan Quinn, I know his Falcons teams weren't necessarily known to be great defenses, and they were more on the offensive side. But I think allowing Quinn to just focus on the defense, which is what he did back in Seattle with the Legion of Boom, I think that he'll definitely put in the right mindset. And I'm hoping that we can get another elite year out of Jalen Smith with better leadership. I'm hoping that he can really turn him around and teach him right, and make sure that the whole defense understands their assignments during the coverages. I definitely think that we'll be better. And I think that with adding Keanu Neal, it's going to add a lot of variety and diversity in what we can do with packages. And I think if we have a good defensive draft, our defense is going to be better. I mean, last year we drafted a wide receiver with the first pick in our draft, and that was, it was controversial, but I think it paid off. So now with this draft, we can go straight defense, and we can go cornerback early. I mean, unless we want to go after Kyle Pitts and be flashy again, but that's another conversation. Yeah, I definitely think we should improve on defense.
Yeah, and then going off on that, the defense, even during the year last year, of course, I think Mike Nolan's system wasn't the best, but you saw towards the end of the year, they were really the positive end of that team when it was led by Andy Dalton, and they were getting them a lot of opportunities late in games, and that's why they were able to go on that little bit of a winning streak to almost compete for a NFC's title. But I think especially if they go well in the draft, you get guys healthy. Of course, you talk about Tristan Hill, who really looked like a good piece for the Cowboys, and then the possibility of a return for Gerald McCoy to go alongside with the one techs that we've just signed in Brent Urban. And now, going off on that Gerald McCoy thing, he talked to TMZ last week about the possibility of returning to Dallas. He said he was open to it. He said he's still talking to guys like Tristan Hill. He's still talking to the locker room. So, of course, the idea of him going back to Tampa Bay is there after Tom Brady won a Super Bowl. But I think coming back to Dallas would be a good thing for him, and it's something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, for sure. That would definitely be impactful. So let's talk about the division as a whole. So the Cowboys, right above the Eagles, have probably been on the more inactive side in terms of free agency in our division. The Washington football team has done a lot. They added cornerback William Jackson III, wide receiver Curtis Samuel, and QB Ryan Fitzpatrick. The Giants made some moves. They added wide receiver Kenny Galladay, tight end Kyle Rudolph, wide receiver John Ross III, and they just added Adoree Jackson today, which we recently broke the news of. And the Eagles have really only added free safety Anthony Harris. So how do you feel about the Cowboys' moves as a whole compared to them, and where do we see the Cowboys' chances at taking this division in 2021?
So first thing, I'll relate it to Dan's two questions here about bringing the Legion Boom to Dallas, and then talk about the wide receivers in the NFC East. I'm just going to say hypothetically, we take a corner at 10, and we've got the two outside guys we want. I think if Dan Quinn's able to bring in this Legion of Boom style defense and do what he wants to do, I think guys like Galladay will definitely still have their moments. But remember who's quarterbacking them.
Yeah, I think
That's the thing that people need to remember when they talk about why did the Cowboys pay Dak all that money. The Eagles will have second-year Jalen Hurts, who started for around half the season last year. That'll be their starter. The Washington football team will likely have Ryan Fitzpatrick as their starter, who's been that guy who's just having the Fitz magic moments. He's enjoyable, but hasn't really had that great pedigree. And then Daniel Jones has been mostly a disappointment for his career, but with Galladay, he could bring more, but with the offensive line they have. Yeah, I think with the offensive line they have, though, I think it causes a lot of issues for them. And I just think a Dak Prescott-led Cowboys team can't be beat by anybody in that division more than one time.
Okay, so here's what I'm going to say on this topic. I think that the Cowboys are definitely the team to beat in the division. And I know that sounds crazy that they didn't win the division last year, and Washington is adding all these pieces to make their defense even better. But if you look at the quarterback room in the NFC East, Dak just stands out. I mean, he's a top 7 quarterback in the NFL, in my opinion. And I think some people would. Yeah. So I think when you add, when you have a QB that's that good compared to Ryan Fitzpatrick, Daniel Jones, and Jalen Hurts, I mean, you have to look at QB as a big deciding factor on a team's success. And Dak stands head and shoulders above everyone else in the division at the moment. Who knows? Maybe the Giants or maybe some other team surprise us and they go QB early in the draft. I mean, it's possible that the Giants could still decide to go QB, and I think that would surprise some people. But at the same time, I don't know if a QB can fall a little lower than expected. Or I also saw the Eagles were very interested still in Deshaun Watson, despite his legal cases going on. If the Eagles could get a Deshaun Watson, then that would definitely change the subject on the division arguments. But I don't know. I definitely like where the Cowboys stand right now in the division. I think, yes, our defense was very bad, just to say it plain and simple. We were bad last year, but we have different leadership now. And we're bringing in guys like Keanu Neal, and we're going to have a high draft pick in terms of defense. So I definitely think that with how good our offense is, if our defense can just be mediocre, if they can just be like middle of the pack, then I think we're the best team in the division.
Mm-hmm. And then I heard you say something about how not having back-to-back NFC not winning last year in the NFC East. There hasn't been a back-to-back NFC East winner since 2004.
Yeah,
and I don't see that changing this year. And if the other teams in the division don't get a quarterback in the next year, I think the Cowboys in the next 2 years will be the only team to do it since 2004. Of course, that's looking down the road a little bit more, but that's just based on the future we see right now because franchise quarterbacks don't just grow on trees.
And that's exactly why we had to pay him and lock him in, even though it seemed like a lot. I think with how that deal was structured, I don't think you could be any happier as a Cowboys fan bringing in a presence like Dak, a locker room guy with his ability on the football field. Just to have his cap hit not really hurt us for the first 2 years of his contract. And then it does raise. It does raise into the 40s, but it raises at the time that the salary cap will raise because of the TV deals. And by then, you're going to have a lot of other quarterbacks who are due for a contract soon getting paid just as much, if not more. You got Lamar Jackson coming up. You got Josh Allen coming up. You got Baker. You got Kyler. You got people who in the near future, in the upcoming years, are definitely going to ask for big contracts. So I think Dak's contract isn't going to look as expensive as some people may critique it now. So
you want me to, I'll go ahead and say real quick. You talk about backing up Dak with Dalton going to Chicago. And then talking about that TV deal, I'm going to go 2 things from the big press conference with Dak, Jerry, and Stephen Jones. They talked about that TV deal and why getting this deal done was a thing to do early, because once that's done, that Patrick Mahomes deal is going to look like change once these TV deals go through, because the market's going to explode. And then talking about backing up Dalton, Dak spoke very highly of a certain former NFC East quarterback in Alex Smith. He spoke very highly about how when he was going through his injury issues, what Alex Smith's recovery meant to him and how that gave him the motivation and the belief in himself that he can overcome what he was going through with such a gruesome injury. And I think Alex Smith, if he doesn't go anywhere else to start, I think that could be a really good backup in Dallas because, of course, he has that emotional connection to him. And Alex Smith brings another veteran quarterback, let's say if there was a scary thing that Dak were to miss a game or 2.
Let me tell you, if we were able to bring in Alex Smith as a backup to Dak Prescott, I would be jumping of joy. That would be not only do I think that that's an upgrade from having Dalton as a backup, in my opinion, I think he's an upgrade from Ryan Fitzpatrick. I know that may be seen as a hot take because Ryan Fitzpatrick, has
Alex Smith is a winner though.
Yeah, Ryan Fitzpatrick, I think, puts up better statistical seasons than Alex Smith. But if I need Alex Smith for one game in the clutch in a very important situation, which could happen if an injury happens to Dak, please don't happen. I'm begging you. I
always got to
can't
prepare for the worst, though.
Yeah, exactly. You always got to prepare for the worst. And if we got to throw a QB out there in the middle of a game to just try and manage the situation, why not get one of the best game managers ever in football and Alex Smith, who can really just control an offense and not make the mistakes and do enough to win. So I'd be very happy. I think that depends on his price tag. I know Mike Fisher tweeted about this a little bit ago. He tweeted about the potential of interests that the Cowboys would have in Alex Smith, and apparently they're interested if the price is right. And I think that's how it is with every free agent in Dallas. They're interested if the price is right. And if Alex Smith has a market where he can get a big deal from another team, then I don't think he'll end up in Dallas. But if he's willing to come in and be a backup and really mentor Dak, I think it's a win-win for everyone. I think it would also really help Dak's game to have a guy with that experience in the NFL too to help and train him off the bench. Yeah.
I just don't think there's a way you lose with that type of deal. And then we were talking about some of the other things in the division. Of course, you saw the Giants ad. I saw this thing on Good Morning Football today. It was talking about, which offense has better pieces, and it was discussing the Giants versus the Cowboys. And I have to bring it up because everybody who knows the Cowboys found it to be ridiculous because you see the first name. Of course, we've already talked enough about the quarterback situations, comparing the two. It stops right there. The conversation ends there, but then you go on. Of course, the Giants add guys like Galladay, Kyle Rudolph, and John Ross. I don't see the point in discussing John Ross. John Ross last year, I believe, had 17 receiving yards and hasn't been a very good quarterback, wide receiver during his time in the NFL. He was a special teams guy, great returner, ran that great 40 time, but I just don't think he's a good piece. Galladay is great. Rudolph's a good receiving guy, but their offensive line is still a very scary thing, and I just don't think they have the pedigree to be able to create a good enough team around a guy like Daniel Jones.
Yeah, when I saw that headline, I had to like look at it like once or twice and make sure it wasn't photoshopped by like a Giants fan page or something. I was like, how are they discussing that on TV?
Yeah.
But I think to your point, to what you were saying, I think the conversation does end whenever you just look at the quarterback position.
Mm-hmm.
But just for laughs and in theory, let's look down the whole line. We got wide receivers, Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, and CeeDee Lamb. I mean, I would argue that all three of them are as good as a Kenny Galladay. I mean, I know CD still has to prove it a little bit on the stat sheet, but he put up almost 1,000 receiving yards without Dak for most of the season last year. I think CD is really going to be a playmaker in the future. And then the running back position, you got Ezekiel Elliott and Saquon Barkley. I know Saquon is more flashy and probably more athletic and more electric than Zeke, but let's not act like Zeke is a scrub. I mean, Zeke has been very consistent in the NFL despite last season. But even last year, I mean, he almost had 1,000 rushing yards on the worst year of his career.
Yeah.
So I definitely don't see any argument that you could say. I think the Cowboys have not only easily the best offense in the NFC East, I think it's pretty arguable that they have the best offense in the NFC as a whole. I mean, if you look down the line, you got teams like the Buccaneers have a lot of good skill positions, and they have Tom Brady. You look at the Packers; they got Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, and Aaron Jones. I think that the Cowboys are up in that discussion for best offenses in the league, and I don't see how you could compare Giants, Washington, or the Eagles in that topic. So we're going to answer one last question. We had kind of talked about this. The South says, now that Dak is back, how will CD do this year? I think that CD has a very high ceiling for this upcoming season, especially with the looks that Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup are going to take in coverage. I think that CD working in that slot is just money for him. And I think it's a nightmare for defenses to have to worry about guarding a guy like CeeDee Lamb in the slot. I think a ceiling, like the best that CD could do, I think he could get up to 1,200 receiving yards. I think he could get up there.
I think he can go more than that. And what I was going to say, going off of that, before Dak got hurt, Amari Cooper was in the top 10 receiving yards, but he wasn't the only Cowboys wide receiver up there. CeeDee Lamb was right behind him statistically, and his chemistry with Dak was almost instant the moment he stepped on the field, especially in the game that Dak got hurt in the Giants. You saw those big catches CD was making over the middle, and he was making sure guys like Logan Ryan heard it. You don't see that out of rookies. He was an immediate change to that offense. And then you talk about, we already know Amari Cooper, and then Michael Gallup, of course, this is a contract year for him. And I think something to note is it doesn't seem like the Cowboys can keep him, but seeing the deal that Corey Davis had, which is a very comparable market, I think if he doesn't have a monster year this year, I think he'll have a good year, but I just don't see him overshadowing CeeDee Lamb or Amari Cooper. But I think he'll be a really good piece. But the cap definitely opens up if that market is what he is. I think they can keep him. And then also another thing, we get the offensive line healthy. I think that's another piece talking about us being the best offense in the NFC. I just don't see there being any kind of things that can stop CeeDee Lamb from being a great wide receiver.
Okay, so very last topic with the whole Michael Gallup potentially not being paid. Just a quick question I'm going to ask you. If we can get a deal where we get Stephon Gilmore and we move Michael Gallup in a second-round pick to the Patriots, is that a move that you're willing to make this year? Like
before the season?
Before the season. You're not willing to do that?
I'm not letting go of Michael Gallup. I'm holding on to him this entire year because you want to keep that trio of receivers as long as you can. Because although good wide receivers grow on trees a little bit more than corners, I think you're going to draft a young guy. You don't want to bring in Gilmore's contract. You just want to be able to hold on to what you have right now and have Michael Gallup for this year, bringing Dak back and that chemistry, and let them try to go on a run. Yeah,
I definitely can hear what you're saying there. I don't know though. The idea of bringing in former defensive player of the year at the cornerback position.
Mhm.
Sounds very nice as a Cowboys fan to have an elite cornerback back there. Well, anyway, that's going to
Mhm.
wrap up the podcast today, guys. I appreciate you all coming in and asking your questions and viewing it with us. I'm excited to have Cameron back on here next Monday. He'll be with us again. And I just want to thank the U Stadium brand for allowing us to do this every week. It's a real pleasure being able to talk to you guys and engage with you guys. All right, thank you.
Same thing here. And thanks, Chris, for the opportunity. Thanks, U Stadium, for the opportunity. And I'm glad to be back next week.
All right, awesome. Thank you.
See you.